Hi everybody, welcome to the eLounge. Today we have Elizabeth Mendoza with us from Financial Aid, and she's going to talk about loans, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we should get some good information today, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Elizabeth. Sorry, Elizabeth, we can't hear you. Could you hit your talk button?
Sorry about that. I have the video on, but not the talk. So yes, what we're going to discuss today is loans, and there are many good, bad, and ugly things about that. Just to start out with the presentation itself, I would categorize that as ugly because it has a lot of information. So write down your questions as we go so that you remember that question when it's time for the talk back. And then we're going to go ahead and get started on the presentation. So understanding student loans. Most of you here at the university have a general understanding of student loans, and many of you are borrowers already. So going into that assumption, we're going to talk about the requirements after that initial FAFSA and certification and information form has been submitted. So that's what we're going to start with. The federal loan borrowing, when you borrow a loan, this requires two initial documents for a loan disbursement for any given academic year or semester. Loan entrance counseling and a master promissory note. Those are two documents that need to be done. Now your master promissory note you need only do once for a subsidized and unsubsidized loan, and as long as that first loan is dispersed, the promissory note is actually good for 10 years. The loan entrance counseling, we like for you to do that each academic year. Now graduation, when you graduate, loan exit counseling is also required by the government. And then you also want to explore your repayment options and update your address with your loan servicers. Now all four documents, the loan entrance counseling, the master promissory note, and the loan exit counseling, and repayment options, those are saved as a PDF file at studentloans.gov. The master promissory note, that is. You can always access your loan counseling and your exit counseling and your repayment options. You can access that at studentloans.gov at any time as well. It's just not saved as a PDF on the website. And the master promissory note is able to be saved as a PDF because you do log onto that website using your FSA ID. And then also, after graduation, it is your responsibility to update your loan servicers with your new address. And it may be that you've lived at your address for years and you're not moving after you graduate from college, but that doesn't mean your loan servicers had that address. They actually may have your parents' address or the first address that you were living at when you first borrowed a loan. Now our starting point when we're talking about loans is our cost of attendance. Now what is that? That is a total of a student's average cost of tuition, room and board, personal and transportation expenses. It can also include child care and your room and board. Now this can change whenever financial aid receives additional information regarding your account or if you request a budget review request. So that can either go higher or lower during an academic year, dependent upon the information that financial aid receives. Now your cost of attendance, which is also known as a budget, and we abbreviate that COA because we love abbreviations in financial aid, that is used to determine the amount of financial aid a student may be eligible for. And this includes student loans, and many students don't realize this. And when they find out about that loans have to be within the cost of attendance set by the school, they don't understand at first that you must realize that it is the Department of Education responsibility and the school's responsibility to not encourage borrowing And so that's why we are required to set a cost of attendance and to have your aid, especially loans, fall within that cost of attendance for the academic year. Now, because your cost of attendance can fluctuate during the year, so does your aid eligibility. And your cost of attendance is not only determined by your bill, but it is also determined in part by the information you reported on your certification and information form that you also fill out at the beginning of the year when you apply. Child care expenses, as I mentioned on the previous page, is an example of what you can report on your CIF. Hours is another example. Since when you do your CIF to meet that priority date of March 15th every year, students aren't enrolled at that point for the following term. So we rely on you to self-report what your hours will be. And based on that is what we base your cost of attendance on to start. This is an average look at a cost of attendance for 9 months. And this is for a resident student. And as you can see, there are varying amounts under housing if you're living off campus, on campus, or at home. And then these costs are for undergraduate students, so you would have to also, if you're a graduate student, you want to add that additional tuition to the tuition amount. And this is available at our website for you to look at or print as well. Now, what does your cost of attendance have to do with financial aid? Federal law dictates that a student may not receive any aid, even loans, that exceeds that cost of attendance that we have set. And again, it includes federal loans, but it also includes private loans or loans issued by the state of Texas. Now, your eligibility for certain types of loans is not only determined by your cost of attendance, but it can also be determined by your FAFSA, the same way the grant aid eligibility is also determined by your FAFSA. And this is where we get into the different loan types. There are loans that are considered need-based by the federal government, and then there are loans that are considered not need-based by the federal government. Your need-based loans are your federal subsidized and your federal Perkins loans. Those are the two federal loans that are offered by the government. Now, the Federal Perkins Loans Program has been suspended by Congress, and so this year's renewals, and from this point on, when we award a Federal Perkins loan, we're only awarding those to students who had it the previous year until our funding for that Perkins loan program has expired. So unfortunately, that program has gone away. Now, the Texas Be On Time loan, again, that's also determined not just by your cost of attendance, but also by your FAFSA. We've typically awarded the Be On Time, well, it's actually in our policy to award the Be On Time loan for undergraduate students only who did not qualify for a Texas grant. So that means that that family contribution from the FAFSA, which we'll talk about on the next slide, that needed to be within that certain Pell Grant range amount. Now, this program has been suspended by the state, so unfortunately all renewals to the Be On Time program are grandfathered in from this point on until there are no more funds in the program. But we do mention the Perkins loans and the Be On Time loans in our presentation still, because we never know when we have students that have these two loan types or may have had them in the past. Now, your family contribution from your FAFSA. This is why you do a FAFSA and how your eligibility for need-based aid, grants, and need-based loans is determined. You provide information on your FAFSA when you submit it for your income for that year, that previous year, your family size for the upcoming year, and the number in college within your family size. And that information is used to calculate the amount that your family can afford to spend on college. And this is called your expected family contribution. Now, what we do in our office is we take our cost of attendance for each particular student and we subtract that expected family contribution that the FAFSA has calculated that you can afford to spend on education. And the resulting figure is called financial need. And this is an amount that is allowed for you to receive in need-based financial aid. So you can consider financial need a secondary component within your cost of attendance because it does determine the type of loans that you are eligible for if you are an undergraduate student. It can make you eligible for subsidized loans, or it can negate your eligibility for subsidized loans. Loan eligibility. So now that we've talked about family contribution, financial need, and the cost of attendance, a common question students have is, why doesn't my federal loan meet my cost of attendance or my financial need? And the answer to that, there are many answers to that actually, but the first one that we look at is the limit, the federal loan limit that a student can receive annually. These limits are based on grade level, dependency status, financial need, not just on the cost of attendance. Now, where cost of attendance really comes into play with this loan eligibility is when your cost of attendance is very low. Then what happens is that your overall aid package is smaller, which means you're going to qualify for less loans, and you may not qualify for the annual loan limit that is allowed by the federal government. A common pitfall that I see students run into is on their CIF. We have graduate students who select the at-home question. When the question asks where you're living, they actually select at home instead of off campus. But most graduate students do not live with their parents, or if they do, they're actually supporting an elderly parent. And so selecting that at home is actually not what you wanted to select. You would have wanted to select the off campus, because the at-home component in the cost of attendance is very small, so it brings down your cost of attendance. So if you're a graduate student living on your own, or you are supporting your parents, you need to be selecting the off-campus option on that CIF one. That way your cost of attendance can be higher. The at-home budget is really for undergraduate students who are still living with mom and dad and have no responsibilities with regard to cost of living. Now, again, going back to the cost of attendance, whenever a student exceeds the cost of attendance, because as we discussed earlier, your cost of attendance can decrease if we find out that you dropped hours. For example, and we're going to talk about that again on the next couple of slides. But when your cost of attendance decreases in the middle of the academic year, your federal aid can be reduced, and or it can be replaced. And we do that. We start reductions and replacements with loan aid first, because that way that is less that you have to pay back in the future. So instead of reducing a grant because of cost of attendance, we start with looking to reduce loan aid first. So this here is an example of loan eligibility for the annual limits, and this is also available at studentloans.gov, so I wanted to give you a snapshot of what that was since we just discussed it. These are actually the aggregate lifetime limits. So this is another snapshot. So as you can see, as a graduate student, that maximum total loan limit is fairly high. So you really, if you're in graduate school, you really want to be conscious about not borrowing the annual loan limit that you just saw on the previous page every year you're a graduate student, because as you can see, you're allowed to borrow quite a bit as far as overall for your education career. And now keep in mind that your debt limit as a graduate student does include your undergraduate debt limit. And then also I wanted to talk about students who have graduated but who are not pursuing a graduate degree. Those students are only eligible for unsubsidized loans, just like the graduate students. They're not eligible for subsidized loans, and your annual loan limit and your aggregate loan limit is still that of an undergraduate student. So when you are planning for your post-bachelor's education career, please think strongly about pursuing a graduate degree, not just a second master's degree. I mean, not just a second bachelor's degree, because that might actually benefit you more to pursue that master's, particularly if you're a student who doesn't necessarily need to borrow for their education. Now, can your cost of attendance change at any time? Yes. As we discussed earlier, your cost of attendance can change when financial aid receives updated information on your student account, or if you provide that information to our office on your own. And yes, when your cost of attendance decreases, your loan eligibility may decrease as well. So some examples are if you are enrolled in fewer hours than forecast, or you drop courses. So if you tell us on your CIS that you're going to be enrolled in 15 credit hours, but you don't enroll in 15 credit hours, you only enroll in 6, and we find out about that after you enroll, then that's going to decrease your cost of attendance, and it may decrease the amount of loan aid you're eligible for. And the same thing if you drop courses. If you were enrolled in 15, but you drop courses down to 6, again, that could decrease your loan aid as well as any other aid type that you may have. Now, if you request an additional loan but you're already awarded your annual loan maximum, we may advise you on a federal parent loan if you're an undergraduate student, or a graduate plus loan if you're a graduate student. And we may also need to go into private loan options for you as well if you are really needing to borrow and you have that eligibility or the room left in your cost of attendance to do so. And then again, you can also initiate a cost of attendance change by submitting a budget review request. These forms are available in our office in room 201 ACT. So your loan options, we're going to talk about subsidized and unsubsidized federal student loans. Undergraduate students are eligible for subsidized loans, and subsidized loans are need-based. Now your unsubsidized loans, those are eligible for all students, so those without financial need, and those students that are graduate students. And graduate students are only eligible for unsubsidized loans. Now, unsubsidized loan, the interest accrues, but your payments are still deferred. So, just keep that in mind. A lot of students don't realize that payments deferred on those unsubsidized loans, but they are. It's just the interest is accruing. Now, again, your subsidized loans are only available to undergraduate students, and only undergraduate students who have not earned their first bachelor's degree yet. Now, the government also pays the interest on subsidized loans for those students who are enrolled at least half-time. Your other options when awarded to federal loan limits, again, mentioned previously, very briefly on the previous slide, the federal parent loan for undergraduate students. Now, this loan is the loan in the parent's name, and that benefits the student because as a student, you are not the loan borrower of the federal parent loan. Now, for any of you graduate students who may be attending, if you have a college-age student, they at some point may ask you to borrow a federal parent loan. And that is an option you have to borrow a federal parent loan for your undergraduate student. You would still be the loan borrower even though you are a college student. There are what we call graduate plus loans for graduate students, and that is a loan in the graduate student's name, and that is also a federal loan option for our students as well. Now, the federal plus loan for graduate students, while there is no limit to the amount you can borrow annually per federal regulations, you do have a limit to your cost of attendance. Now, each time you request to borrow a graduate plus loan, a credit check is run each time. And so again, a credit inquiry going in on your credit report does bring your credit report down. So please keep that in mind if you want to apply for other loans such as home loans or car loans within the same year. And then the interest rate is higher on those graduate plus loans. It's 7.2%. And then interest also accrues. And again, overall, this can make your loan indebtedness much higher because of that loan accrual and the higher interest rate. It also, while it comes with a built-in school deferment, it does not have a grace period, such as your federal subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Other loan options, private education loans, which are loans offered by private lending institutions. Now, these are not regulated. The only regulation that is given on these private education loans is cost of attendance. Now, the interest rates are higher than federal loans, including Graduate Plus loans, and the interest rates can be variable. They're almost always variable interest rates, which means your interest rate can change each quarter or annually. Interest will accrue on these loans while you're in school. A school deferment is not always an option with some of these lenders. And the repayment options after you graduate are not as generous. For example, you don't have a grace period on these private education loans. If you have a break in between enrollment, you may not be able to get an in-school deferment on your private loan as well. And then also repayment plans, there's not a great variety of repayment plans to choose from. Generally with private education loans, they say this is what you have to pay each month, and they won't alter that for any reason, even if it creates a hardship to you to repay that amount. Private education loan debt is actually what's driving the overall overall student loan debt, student education loan debt that you hear about in the news. It's not actually because of the federal loan debt that students have. It's actually because of the private education loan debt. These are the loans that the majority of students are not paying back, that they're defaulting on. So we do caution you when you come to us and say you want to know what your private loan options are. We will try to find other options for you before this option. So your responsibilities as a loan borrower, again, referring back to the master promissory note, you can read that. What you signed electronically, because it's saved as a PDF at studentloans.gov, you log on with your FSA ID. And so we always encourage students to review that every year, though it is not a requirement. And again, to be eligible for federal student loans, you must be half-time. And this includes federal parent loans and Graduate Plus loans and most private education loans. And if you drop to less than half-time after your loan aid has been released to your account, you may not be eligible for all or part of it that was released. And when that happens, TWU is required to repay that loan back on your behalf, whether it's federal or private, and then your debt becomes to TWU, not to that loan servicer. And what that means is that there's no payment plan at that point with the university. You have to pay that by the next billing cycle. And I'd also like to mention for half-time status, the registrar certifies half-time status at 6 credit hours unless you're enrolled in thesis, professional paper, or dissertation. No matter what your department says, no matter what your professional school says, it is always 6 credit hours for every semester, including summer. Now, going back to repaying, again, when you drop to less than half-time, what we are required to do is to determine how much of your financial aid you earned based on how much of the semester that you attended. And if we determine based on our calculation that there was a portion of any aid, including loan aid, that you did not earn, what we do is we return that back to the lender, the federal government, on your behalf. And it negates your promissory note for the amount that we returned, which means because we're returning it for you, your debt is now owed to TWU for the amount of financial aid or federal loan or private loan that we returned for you. And so what happens is the bursar will bill you, and then that repayment amount is due by the next billing due date. Because any promissory note for any loan money that we had returned, again, it becomes void because your debt is no longer to that lender, it is to TWU. Now, I want to make it clear that financial aid cannot tell you what you would owe before you drop. We have a lot of students call asking that question because they want them to know before they make the determination whether or not to drop. We can't tell you that because it depends on the date of your withdrawal. And until we run that calculation, we have no idea how much of that loan aid that you've earned and how much you would have to repay. So unfortunately, you know, we're not able to tell you that. And aside from that, we want you to make your education decisions based on what's best for your education, not what you have to repay. Because the last thing we want is, you know, for students to do something that, you know, may prohibit their education success because they were afraid that they would have too much to repay in financial aid. So unfortunately, you know, as an adult, as a college student, these are sometimes tough decisions that you have to make and that you have to make on your own. Dropping to less than half time also negates your in-school status on all federal loans, including Parent Plus loans, Graduate Plus loans, and most private education loans. So what this means is that your grace period on any of your federal student loans will begin, and any federal student loans you previously borrowed for which you were in repayment will enter repayment again the month following your drop. Now, keep in mind that federal parent loans and Graduate Plus loans and private education loans do not have a grace period, so repayment will begin immediately the month following your drop to less than half time or if you completely withdraw. This is very important if any of you out there are undergraduate students who are still dependent on your FAFSA and you've asked and your parent has borrowed a Federal Plus loan. Because if you're going to withdraw completely or drop to less than half time, you need to tell your parent before they get that repayment notice on that federal parent loan that they have to start repaying. So the bottom line is when you are billed by TWU for any repayment for any financial aid or federal or private loan that you're no longer eligible for, the payment is due by the next due date. Excuses are not payment, and believe me, I've heard some excuses that just make my heart bleed. I mean, I feel, you know, really bad that we're putting students who are in repayment that have such hardships. But unfortunately, at that point, there is nothing that we can really do. Once you are billed, you are required to repay TWU by the next billing cycle. Now, if this happens with the drop date looming, you do need to make payment arrangements so that your schedule is not dropped. Please refer to the academic calendar whenever you're dropping because, you know, the bursar will drop you. You can do an emergency loan to help tide you over until you find the funds to, you know, repay anything that you have to repay. Or there could be other options for you if you visit financial aid or if you visit Student Life. So your responsibilities with federal loans is to know what you owe overall, to know what you're borrowing not just this academic year, but what you've borrowed again overall. To repay aid to TWU if you are no longer eligible, and making payment arrangements by the appropriate due date, including drop dates. Now, while there is no formal payment plan once a student withdraws completely, by making a payment every month of what you can to the bursar, this will keep your account from going to collections. And this is very important because once an account goes to collections, it goes on your credit report as bad credit, which is bad, and also the credit agency can charge you substantial late fees for which you are obligated to pay. So I do recommend that if unfortunately you find yourself in a situation where you have to pay TWU after you've withdrawn for any reason, you know, it could be that you broke a glass door and they've charged you for it. For any reason, try to make a payment monthly to keep your account from going to collections. And again, once you've hit that point where you've been billed by TWU for repayment because you've withdrawn completely, again, at that point, your options are really, really limited. So once you find yourself in a danger zone, before you get to the point where you have to withdraw completely or even drop to less than half time, please contact Student Life. That's one of the reasons why their office actually exists, is to help students in these situations. If you're living on campus, contact Resident Life as well. They may be able to help you. And also financial aid. Again, we want to see students as early as possible for those who are, experiencing any type of financial difficulties. And then also, always contact your loan servicers to update your address each time you move. Never make assumptions. As I mentioned previously, half-time status is 6 credit hours unless you are enrolled in at least 3 credit hours of thesis, professional paper, or dissertation. Now, this doesn't mean you can be an independent study. It doesn't mean that you can be in research hours at 3 credit hours. You must be in 6. I think we're having a problem on this campus with a lot in the departments where people refer to half-time status very loosely. And in their head, they're thinking that half-time status is actually 5 credit hours to 11 credit hours. But that's not true. Half-time status stops at 6 credit hours. Once you fall below 5 credit hours, unless you have thesis, professional paper, or dissertation hours, you are below half-time status and are no longer eligible for federal student loans at that point. Finally, please, please, please think about submitting budget review requests if you find yourself in a situation where we tell you you have to repay aid, even if it's loan aid, because it could minimize or negate any aid repayment due to a cost of attendance change. Please don't think it's too much trouble. You may feel like it's a hassle for you, but again, what's more of a hassle, submitting copies of your bills or repaying TWU by the next bill date for aid that you didn't qualify for? Please take into consideration that anything you submit to the office must be done in a timely manner, because any request for a budget review, it takes time. It can take anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks, depending on the time of year that you are submitting the request. And in the meantime, you still must make payment arrangements with the bursar's office if you are already in repayment. More responsibilities, as if there weren't enough already. If you withdraw completely, just know that you will most likely owe financial aid back to the school. How much aid, including loan aid, will depend on the day of withdrawal. And remember, the financial aid office will not be able to tell you what you owe before you drop. And then know that if you do owe, you will be billed. How you know that you owe, it would be on that following bill cycle. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you check your bill for the next 2 to 3 months, because again, it takes on our staff, because we're doing this by paper and people are actually doing this. So it takes us time for everything to get filtered through the system. So you definitely want to keep watching your bill over the next 2 to 3 months after you drop. Resources, studentloans.gov is basically your lifeline. Your entrance and your exit counseling. Your master promissory note is saved there. Every master promissory note for a Graduate Plus loan is also saved there. National Student Loan Data Systems, again, that is your second lifeline. That has your complete federal loan history. It'll tell you every loan you've ever borrowed from every institution on the federal side, and it will also tell you who the servicers are for each loan. Web Advisor, where you pay your bill and where you can set up a payment plan if you're still eligible for a payment plan. And remember to update your contact information with your federal loan and your private loan servicers, because it's not magic. They don't just automatically know if you've moved. They don't know that you've lived at a place for 7 years and you no longer live with your mom and dad. So never assume that they have your current address. Other opportunities, our financial aid office, it does have financial literacy sessions at the Denton campus. So if you are ever, on campus on a day of our session, you may want to consider attending, or you may also email us or call us and ask us or suggest an alternate timeline that can help our commuter students attend our sessions. there is a 100 scholarship drawing per session, and you can enter more than once by attending more than one session. And while the first 3 have already passed, we do have another one from 2 to 3 today, and then again on Monday, 11 to 12 and 2 to 3. Financial management and good credit are on Monday, and later this afternoon is understanding financial aid. And so I guess we're ready for some questions.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. We do have one question from Carla. She's wondering if you have reached your limit for loans as a graduate student, are there any other funding options available to meet your costs?
Well, if it's your annual limit that you've reached on an unsubsidized loan, you do have that federal loan option of the Graduate Plus loan that you could apply for, and we recommend that before applying for a private education loan. Graduate students, again, do not have an annual or an aggregate loan limit on that Graduate Plus loan. So if they pass the credit check and are within cost of attendance, they can take that loan. Now, if you're an undergraduate student who's reached those loan limits, I would suggest that's probably you're going to want to come into the office or call and talk to someone. You're also going to want to talk to Student Life, because what we want to do is review your academic record and your account, find out, you know, what is causing your hardship, that you need these additional loans. Now, most students usually have more success in gaining funding if they still owe the university for tuition or housing and it's preventing them from enrolling, and they have a high grade point average. There may be, you know, some scholarship aid, provided that you've done your scholarship application, which the deadline is March 15th, so go and do it if you haven't done it, you know, in those situations. And so there could be options outside of private loans or Graduate Plus loans for you. When those are no longer available to you or just not available to you, and you're an undergraduate student, if you're a dependent student, the federal parent loan would be an option for you as well. If you're at your aggregate loan limit as a graduate student, then what I would say is do your FAFSA and your CIF before the priority date, because we have graduate tuition grants, and we also have the Texas Public Education Grant that graduate students can still be eligible for if they file early and are enrolled at least half-time in a degree-seeking program.
Thank you. We have another question. We have a student who received a letter saying she was not eligible to receive financial aid, and she is enrolled in pre-master's leveling courses. Are there any other options for those students?
Well, usually that letter or that email comes directly from a financial aid counselor. So I would respond to that email as well. Usually for students who are non-degree seeking students and they're not pursuing any type of certificate or licensing, they're not eligible for any federal aid at all. So at that point, you know, because of that, what we look to at that point would be to discuss private loan options, unfortunately, if it's within the current academic year. So if you have this letter from our office and it is regarding the spring semester, then yes, most likely at this point, it's private loans would be your option. Now, I always and truly believe that it is always an option to go speak to Ms. Lisa Quinones in Enrollment Services. Her office is in admissions now, and she's a scholarship manager. There could be some type of scholarship resource for you. You know, if you had done your scholarship application for 15-16, and she may be able to find you some type of scholarship. It may not be a very large scholarship, but you know, any little bit at this point I think is going to help. And again, if you receive this letter about a following academic year, then you know what you should be doing is your scholarship application. and also searching for any private scholarship opportunities as well. And on our website, we have a link to TG, scholarship search engine, but there are also other scholarship search engines out there as well, such as FastWeb.
Thank you, Elizabeth. One more question. Are dissertation or thesis hours funded the same as regular credit hours?
If you have 3 credit hours of thesis, dissertation, or professional paper, that 3 credit hours is equivalent to 6 credit hours, which is half time. So that a student with those hours would receive, has the same eligibility as a student of that grade level, graduate student who is attending half time, provided that they haven't exceeded their aggregate loan limit. And if they've applied early, they can still be eligible for that graduate tuition grant and that Texas Public Education grant.
Okay, great. And my question is, for these financial wellness workshops, do you need to sign up beforehand to be eligible to win the scholarship, or can you just walk in to the session and join?
Right, that's a really good question. When you attend the session, there is a sign-in sheet. And so you sign in on that sign-in sheet, and as long as you stay for the entire presentation, then you are in the scholarship drawing. You don't need to sign up ahead of time. To be a part of the scholarship drawing. You can do that when you get there. We actually do not at this time have an RSVP capability for these sessions. So that is why we take attendance on the day, not just for the scholarship drawing, but so that we can keep track of how many students attended the session.
Great. And another question I have for our distance ed students, will these workshops be webcasted?
We would love to do that. One of the problems that we run into is that in the Office of Financial Aid, we're all financial aid professionals, and we have not been funded by our university administration for a position for a technology position. So we definitely have to figure out how to webcast these using our limited technology resources, or partner with with another department on campus who can do that for us. We do have a Facebook page, so we are exploring the option of broadcasting these on our Facebook page as part of possibly doing some type of YouTube video of our presentation.
Can also help with live webcasting as well.
Which is? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Our office, the CARE office, we can also help with the live webcasting as well, and that is why we do these eLounges also, so that the distance ed students can get this information through the eLounge, and we can kind of reiterate the information that y'all give in your financial aid sessions through our eLounges here.
Yeah, that would be great. And I can definitely send you these presentations too, so that you can find out where that would best fit.
That would be great. We would love that. I'm not seeing any other questions. My very last question that I have is, how important is it for a student to start paying back interest on loans before graduation? And if a student does want to go ahead and start this process, how would they go about that?
That is a really good question. And whenever a student has an unsubsidized loan or a Graduate Plus loan, the government sends quarterly interest statements every quarter. So, for example, in the fall, when that quarter rolls around, it's October. So you would receive a quarterly interest statement in October, and it will tell you how much interest has accrued during that quarter, and it provides you with an envelope and a payment stub to repay that. Now again, if you're an undergraduate student, these statements are most likely being mailed to your parent, and your parent is probably tossing them in the trash because they're like, oh, she's in school, she doesn't need to pay. Because that's what parents do. I know this because I have a parent, and that's what my parent did. And especially when you first start out with loan borrowing, the amount of interest that accrues monthly or even quarterly is actually not that much. So it's definitely, you know, if you keep your loan borrowing down, it's definitely affordable to repay that interest. And what happens when you don't pay that interest is the lender starts earning interest off the interest. Because what they do, the more interest that accrues, once you enter repayment, they take all that interest they accrued, they don't just add it to your loan principal, which is the original amount that you borrowed. What they do is they multiply it by the interest rate that you were charged when you first borrowed the loan, or if you borrowed a variable interest loan, they will multiply that accrued interest by the current interest rate, which is what private loan lenders do. And then that difference is then added back to the interest, and then that total is then added to your loan principal. So when we're talking about a graduate student who's borrowed $38,000 or more, that is a lot of money. So you can quickly turn a $100,000 loan debt into a $250,000 loan debt. So yeah, I would say if you can afford it, pay it quarterly. If you want to be billed monthly, it's your option to contact your lender and ask to be billed monthly for the interest, but specify interest-only monthly payments. That way they don't start billing you for your entire loan balance.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This session has been extremely helpful, and I've gotten some great information. We do have another question from Carla. She has applied through the scholarship link. Okay, never mind. That's going to be a question for Lisa Q, and we're going to connect Carla. We'll connect you to her for scholarships. Other than that, I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you again, Elizabeth, and thank you everybody else for joining us. If you would like to be eligible to win a prize from the CARE office, please submit your TWU email into the chat box before you sign off. And join us next week on Thursday, March 3rd. We'll be talking about test anxiety, so it should be another really informative eLounge. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.